Big news. A family member secretly read your soulmate's private messages about you. My beloved child. Something happened inside your soulmate's family that was never supposed to reach you. A family member secretly opened your soulmate's private messages, expecting to find something ordinary. Instead, they found your name. Not once. Not casually. Your name appeared in conversations your soulmate had carefully kept away from everyone else. But what truly unsettled this person wasn't simply that your soulmate had been talking about you. It was the way they talked about you when they believed nobody was watching. There were messages written late at night, words that had never been spoken directly to you, and one particular conversation that made this family member stop scrolling completely. Because suddenly, they realized your soulmate had been hiding feelings far deeper than anyone in the family understood. And before they could put the phone down, they saw something else, something connected to a decision your soulmate had apparently already made. The family member kept reading. That was when curiosity turned into shock. Your soulmate had described moments with you that nobody else knew mattered so much. A small conversation you may have forgotten. A moment when you walked away without realizing they were watching. Even something you said that stayed in their mind long afterward. But buried between those emotional messages was a confession that changed everything. Your soulmate admitted they had deliberately acted distant around you because someone in the family had been questioning the connection. They were afraid that showing exactly how much you mattered would create pressure, arguments, and interference. So while their behavior may have made you wonder whether their feelings were fading, these private messages revealed almost the opposite. Your soulmate had been protecting something they weren't ready to let the family control. Don't skip, because the person reading those messages suddenly realized something uncomfortable. Some of the distance between you and your soulmate may have started inside that very family. Then came the message they were never meant to see. Your soulmate had written about a future choice involving you, and the words were so serious that the family member read them twice. There was no joking tone. No uncertainty. Your soulmate seemed to have reached a private conclusion after months of confusion, and apparently they hadn't told you yet because they wanted to do something first. That discovery changed the family member's entire attitude. They quietly returned the phone exactly where they found it, pretending nothing had happened. But they couldn't forget what they had read. Later that same day, they approached another relative and almost revealed everything. Until your soulmate unexpectedly entered the room. The conversation stopped instantly. Your soulmate noticed the silence, looked from one face to another, and seemed to sense that something was wrong. But here is where this becomes much bigger, because the family member hadn't only discovered how your soulmate truly felt about you. They had also seen the final message on the screen, a message revealing exactly what your soulmate was preparing to do next. The silence in that room suddenly felt heavier than anyone expected. Your soulmate could tell something had shifted, but they didn't yet know why. The family member avoided eye contact, afraid that one wrong expression would expose what they had done. And then your soulmate reached for the phone. For one terrifying second, the family member wondered whether the screen had been left on, whether a message had been opened, whether there was some tiny clue proving someone had crossed that private boundary. But your soulmate didn't confront anyone. Instead, they checked the conversation they had been writing earlier, and their expression changed. Because that final message wasn't just another confession about missing you. It mentioned a specific plan involving you, one your soulmate had been quietly preparing without telling the family. And now the person who had secretly read it knew your soulmate was much closer to acting than anyone realized. What did that message actually say? Not everything was spelled out directly, and that made it even more unsettling. Your soulmate had told someone they trusted that they were tired of allowing other people's opinions to determine what happened between you. They admitted that pretending to be unaffected had become exhausting. More importantly, they wrote that they were preparing to have one serious conversation that could finally change the direction of this connection. The family member understood immediately who that conversation involved: you. But there was another sentence beneath it. A sentence about correcting something the family had been allowed to believe about you for far too long. Suddenly, the person reading those messages began connecting details they had previously ignored. Certain family conversations. Certain assumptions about you. Certain moments when your soulmate had become strangely defensive whenever your name came up. It was becoming clear that someone had shaped the family's opinion of you before they ever had the chance to understand the truth. And that realization created a new problem. The family member who invaded your soulmate's privacy now knew information that could completely change how the family viewed you, but admitting it would mean confessing how they discovered it. So they stayed quiet. At least for the moment. Your soulmate, meanwhile, began behaving differently. They carried the phone everywhere. They became careful about leaving it unattended. And later that evening, they sent another private message, one the family member desperately wanted to see but couldn't. Something huge is waiting for you, because shortly afterward, your soulmate did something nobody in that house expected. They asked one particular relative to speak privately, behind a closed door. The same relative whose opinion had influenced so much of the tension surrounding you. Voices remained low at first. Then the family member outside heard your name clearly. And moments later came a sentence that changed the atmosphere completely. Your soulmate had finally discovered who started the story about you that the family had believed all this time. What happened behind that closed door was more revealing than anyone outside could have imagined. Your soulmate didn't raise their voice at first. They simply asked one precise question: why did you tell everyone that about them? The relative tried to dismiss it as concern, claiming they had only repeated something they believed was true. But your soulmate had already checked the details. Dates didn't match. Conversations had been twisted. Something you supposedly said had never been said at all. And suddenly, months of strange behavior began making sense. The hesitation. The coldness from certain relatives. The subtle pressure your soulmate had felt whenever your name appeared. Someone had planted a version of you inside that family before they ever truly knew you. But your soulmate wasn't interested in another excuse. They wanted to know where the story had actually started, and the answer pointed towards someone they had trusted deeply. Outside the room, the family member who had secretly read those messages felt their stomach drop. They already knew your soulmate had been questioning the family's version of events, because they had seen it written privately. What they didn't know was that your soulmate had gathered proof. A saved conversation. An old message. One small detail that contradicted the entire story. Stay till the end, because this is where the person who invaded your soulmate's privacy began seeing you differently. Those private messages hadn't described you as someone creating trouble. Your soulmate had written about your patience, the moments you stayed quiet instead of fighting back, and the fact that you never seemed interested in turning them against their family. That realization was painful. Because while people had been judging you, your soulmate had quietly been noticing something else. You had been carrying the consequences of a story you didn't even know was being told. Then the door opened. Your soulmate stepped out holding the phone, but their expression was strangely calm. That calmness frightened the family member more than anger would have. The relative inside remained seated, saying nothing. Your soulmate walked past everyone and disappeared into another room. Minutes later, the family member heard the unmistakable sound of a message being sent. They couldn't see the screen this time. They couldn't secretly read another word. But they knew exactly who might be receiving it. You. And there was one more complication they hadn't expected. The relative behind the closed door had finally admitted where the false story originated, and apparently, it began after someone accidentally discovered an older private conversation involving you and your soulmate. A conversation from long before the current family tension began. And what had been written in that old exchange was important enough that your soulmate immediately started searching for it. Your soulmate searched through old conversations with a kind of urgency nobody in the house had seen before. Message after message disappeared beneath their thumb until they finally stopped at one exchange from months earlier. It looked harmless at first. Just a private conversation from a time when the connection between you felt easier, before family opinions began changing everything. But one sentence had apparently been taken out of context and repeated to someone else. From there, the meaning had been altered again and again until it became something completely different. Your soulmate stared at the original words and finally understood how the misunderstanding had grown. Yet another detail bothered them even more. The person who first shared that private conversation could only have known about it by looking at something that was never meant for them. This wasn't the first time someone in the family had crossed that boundary. That realization changed your soulmate's focus completely. Until this moment, they had believed the family's resistance came from genuine concern. Now they were beginning to understand that certain opinions had been built on private information, incomplete conversations, and assumptions nobody had bothered to verify. And suddenly, the family member who had secretly read the recent messages became terrified. Because they had just done the exact same thing. They had opened something private, read your name, and almost carried those words to another relative. The difference was that this time, what they discovered made them question everything they had believed about you. They remembered one particular line your soulmate had written, that you had been judged for things you never had the opportunity to explain. Those words now felt painfully accurate. And for the first time, this family member began wondering whether staying silent about what they had done would only continue the same pattern. That evening, something unexpected happened. The family member approached your soulmate alone and said there was something they needed to confess. Your soulmate immediately sensed the seriousness in their voice. For several seconds, neither person spoke. Then came the admission, "I saw your messages about them." Your soulmate froze. Not because their feelings had been discovered, but because they instantly realized exactly how much this person might know. The family member apologized and admitted they had continued reading after seeing your name. But before your soulmate could respond, they revealed something else. Those messages had changed their opinion of you. They no longer believed the version of you they had heard from others. And then they mentioned the final message, the one about your soulmate's secret decision. Your soulmate's face changed immediately. Because that decision was supposed to remain hidden until one specific thing happened first. And now, with the secret exposed inside the family, your soulmate had to decide whether to wait, or move toward you sooner than planned. Your soulmate didn't answer immediately. They looked at the family member with a mixture of disappointment and relief, because something deeply private had been violated, yet the truth had finally reached someone who needed to hear it. Then your soulmate asked the question that changed the entire conversation: "How much did you read?" The family member hesitated before admitting they had seen nearly everything: your name, the hidden feelings, the frustration with the family, and the message about finally speaking to you honestly. But there was one detail they hadn't understood. Your soulmate had written that before approaching you, they needed to correct something publicly within the family. They refused to come toward you while allowing people around them to continue believing a false version of who you were. And now that someone else knew the truth, keeping quiet suddenly felt impossible. Instead of exploding, your soulmate made an unexpected request. They asked the family member to sit with everyone the following day and tell them exactly what had happened. Not the private details about you, but the truth about how easily assumptions had been created from conversations that were never theirs to read. That request shook the family member. Confessing would mean admitting they had crossed a boundary too. Yet they agreed, because the messages had shown them something nobody's gossip ever had: how carefully your soulmate had been protecting you even during periods when you probably believed they had forgotten you. One message said your soulmate would rather lose an argument with the family than let you be blamed for something you didn't do. Another admitted they had almost contacted you several times, only to stop because they wanted to return with clarity instead of more confusion. But the most important message was still being protected. Later that night, your soulmate opened that final conversation again. This time, they didn't hide the screen. The family member saw only a few words before looking away, but those few words were enough. Your soulmate had apparently been preparing something tangible, not merely another emotional conversation. There was a date mentioned, a place, and a sentence about finally giving you something that had been kept away for months. Don't skip, because this wasn't about an expensive gift or some dramatic display. It was connected to the very beginning of the misunderstanding, and your soulmate believed that once you saw it, you would finally understand why they had acted so strangely. The next morning, the family gathered as promised. The confession began. Faces changed as the truth unfolded. Then, just when your soulmate seemed ready to reveal the final piece, one relative interrupted with 5 words that silenced the entire room: "I still have the original." Nobody expected those 5 words to come from that particular relative. Your soulmate turned slowly and asked what they meant by the original. For a moment, the relative seemed to regret speaking at all. Then they disappeared into another room and returned holding an old phone that hadn't been used in months. Buried inside it was a screenshot of the conversation that had started everything. But this version contained something the family had never seen. The messages immediately before and after the sentence that had been repeated about you. Once those missing lines appeared, the meaning changed completely. What had been presented as proof that you were trying to create distance between your soulmate and the family was actually the opposite. You had been encouraging patience. You had even expressed concern about causing conflict. The room went quiet because the misunderstanding wasn't small anymore. Someone had deliberately removed the part that protected you. Your soulmate asked who had cropped the screenshot. Nobody answered. Then the relative holding the old phone admitted that the edited version had been sent to them by another family member, along with a warning that you were becoming too important to your soulmate. That phrase hit differently now. Suddenly, this wasn't simply about people misunderstanding a private conversation. Someone had become uncomfortable with how serious your soulmate's feelings were becoming and had tried to influence the family before your soulmate could make their own choice. The family member who had recently read the private messages looked devastated. They realized how easily they could have repeated the same mistake, taking private words and turning them into family discussion. Instead, what they had read revealed something undeniable. Despite all the pressure, your soulmate's feelings about you had never disappeared. They had simply become more guarded. And now your soulmate finally knew why. But your soulmate wasn't finished. They took out their phone, opened the private conversation the family member had secretly discovered, and read only one sentence aloud. Not your intimate words. Not anything meant to embarrass you. Just their own decision. I'm done letting other people decide what this connection means. Then they locked the screen. Nobody argued. Nobody needed another explanation. Your soulmate stood up and said the rest of those messages belonged to you and them, not the family. That boundary changed the atmosphere instantly. But moments later, the relative with the old phone quietly pulled your soulmate aside and revealed there was another screenshot they hadn't shown everyone. It contained a message written on the same night the original conversation was exposed. And according to that message, the person who interfered hadn't acted alone. Someone outside the family had been receiving private information about you from the beginning. Your soulmate's expression changed the moment they saw that second screenshot. A name appeared at the top that they recognized immediately, but it wasn't someone they expected to be connected to the family's private conversations. The messages showed that information about you had been quietly passed outside the household. Small details at first, then increasingly personal updates about how your soulmate felt, whether you two had spoken, and whether the family approved of the connection. The outside person had repeatedly encouraged one relative to be careful about you, even though there was no real evidence that you had done anything wrong. Suddenly, your soulmate understood why certain rumors seemed to appear immediately after private family discussions. Someone had been feeding the situation from both sides, keeping suspicion alive whenever things between you and your soulmate started becoming calmer. But there was a detail hidden near the bottom of the screenshot that made your soulmate look twice. The outside person had once asked whether your soulmate still kept your old messages. That question felt strangely specific. How would someone outside the family even know those conversations existed? Your soulmate began comparing dates, and the pattern became impossible to ignore. Each time they had privately expressed stronger feelings about you, tension seemed to appear shortly afterward. A relative would suddenly question the connection. Someone would repeat a distorted version of something you had supposedly said. Then your soulmate would pull back, believing distance might protect everyone from another argument. Now they realized that distance had actually helped the misunderstanding survive. The family member who recently read the private messages finally said what everyone else was thinking: "We've been reacting to pieces of a story instead of asking you what was true." That sentence changed something inside your soulmate. They were no longer interested in chasing every rumor or confronting every person who had participated. Their attention returned to you. They opened the message they had been preparing and stared at it for several seconds. This was supposed to be sent later, after the family situation was completely resolved. But waiting suddenly felt like repeating the same mistake. Allowing other people's actions to determine when they could finally be honest with you. So your soulmate changed the plan. They deleted 2 cautious sentences, rewrote the opening, and placed their finger over the send button. Yet before they pressed it, the relative holding the old phone stopped them. There was one final detail in the screenshot they hadn't explained. The outside person had received one piece of information that only your soulmate and you should have known. And discovering who gave them that information was about to reveal exactly how far this invasion of privacy had really gone. That final detail made your soulmate put the phone down without sending anything. The screenshot contained a reference to a private promise made between you and your soulmate months earlier, a promise neither of you had shared with the family. For several seconds, your soulmate couldn't understand how anyone else could possibly know about it. Then one memory returned with uncomfortable clarity. On the night that promise was discussed, your soulmate had briefly left their phone unattended during a family gathering. At the time, it meant nothing. Now it meant everything. Someone had apparently seen enough of that conversation to understand how serious this connection had become. But instead of asking your soulmate about it, they had quietly passed the information along. The recent invasion of privacy was no longer an isolated mistake. It was repeating something that had already happened before, except this time, the family member who read the messages had chosen to confess. That distinction mattered. Your soulmate looked at the family member who had admitted reading the recent messages and said something nobody expected: "What you did was wrong, but what you do with the truth now matters." The family member didn't defend themselves. Instead, they revealed one last thing they remembered seeing before closing the messages. Your soulmate had written that they weren't angry with you for the distance between you. They weren't waiting for you to prove anything. They were afraid that after so much interference, you might no longer believe anything they said. That confession changed the mood completely. Because beneath all the secrecy, family pressure, and misunderstood conversations was a simpler fear: your soulmate didn't know whether they still had the right to approach you. And that was why the message they had been preparing mattered so much. It wasn't designed to pressure you into returning. It was meant to finally give you the truth and allow you to decide what happened next. Then your soulmate made a choice that surprised everyone. They refused to let another relative read the screenshots. They refused to turn your private history into evidence for a family debate. Instead, they asked for copies, saved them securely, and said the rest would be handled directly with you. Moments later, they picked up the phone again and returned to the unsent message. This time, there was no hesitation. Their finger touched the screen. Sent. The family member watched your soulmate exhale as if they had been holding that breath for months. But almost immediately, another notification appeared, not from you. It came from the outside person whose name had been discovered in those old screenshots. The message contained only a few words, yet they were enough to make your soulmate's face go completely still. Somehow, that person already knew the family had uncovered the truth, and they were asking your soulmate not to tell you what really happened. Your soulmate stared at that warning and immediately understood one thing: the outside person was afraid. Not because of some dramatic secret, but because the full timeline could finally expose how much unnecessary confusion they had helped create. Your soulmate didn't answer right away. Instead, they showed the message to the relative holding the old phone and asked a simple question: "Did you tell them what happened here today?" The answer was no. That meant someone else inside the family had already contacted this person. Suddenly, the room that had just begun confronting the truth felt uncertain again. Your soulmate looked around at the same people who had spent months forming opinions about you and realized the problem had never been just one leaked conversation. Private information had been moving through a chain of people, with each person adding assumptions before passing it along. And somewhere in that chain was the person who had just warned your soulmate to keep you in the dark. Instead of responding emotionally, your soulmate typed one careful question: "What exactly are you afraid I'll tell them?" The reply didn't come immediately. Minutes passed. Then the typing indicator appeared, vanished, and appeared again. Finally, a message arrived. The outside person claimed they had only been trying to prevent your soulmate from making a decision they might regret. But beneath that explanation came an accidental admission. They mentioned knowing that your soulmate had planned to reach out to you weeks earlier, something your soulmate had revealed only in one private family conversation. That was enough. Your soulmate now knew someone close to them had continued sharing updates even after the original misunderstanding began causing damage. The family member who had secretly read the recent messages lowered their eyes. They understood the irony. Everyone had claimed they were protecting your soulmate, yet nobody had protected your soulmate's privacy. Then your phone became the center of everything, even though you weren't standing in that room. The message your soulmate had sent to you remained unanswered. They checked it once, then forced themselves to stop. They had finally told you that there were things about the separation and family tension you had never been allowed to see clearly. They asked for nothing except one chance to explain. But before your response arrived, your soulmate received another message from the outside person, this one much longer. Halfway through it was a confession that completely changed the timeline. The first private information about you had not come from the relative everyone suspected. It had come from someone who had access to your soulmate's phone long before the family argument started. And when your soulmate read the name attached to that admission, they realized the person responsible had been sitting quietly in the room the entire time. Your soulmate slowly lifted their eyes from the screen and looked across the room. Nobody understood why their expression had suddenly changed, except one person. That relative went unusually still. No questions. No confusion. Just silence. Your soulmate didn't accuse them immediately. Instead, they asked whether they remembered the night months ago when the phone had been left unattended. The relative tried to brush it off, but their answer came too quickly. Then your soulmate mentioned the private promise between you, the detail that somehow traveled outside the family. The relative's face changed. That was enough. They finally admitted seeing part of your conversation that night. At first, they claimed it had been accidental. A notification appeared, your name caught their attention, and curiosity took over. But curiosity hadn't ended with one glance. They opened the conversation, read further, and discovered how deeply your soulmate cared about you. The confession became harder from there. That relative admitted they had worried your soulmate was becoming emotionally committed before the family understood who you were. Instead of speaking directly to your soulmate, they shared what they had seen with someone outside the family and asked for advice. That outside person then interpreted your private words in the worst possible way. Soon, concern became suspicion. Suspicion became gossip. And gossip became the edited story that eventually reached everyone else. Your soulmate listened without interrupting, but one question remained: why had nobody ever come directly to you? The relative had no convincing answer. They had formed an opinion from fragments and then watched that opinion influence months of decisions. The family member who had read the recent messages looked especially shaken, because they realized they had stood at the exact same crossroads, and could easily have repeated the cycle. Then your soulmate said something that ended the argument completely. Your private messages were not family property. Your feelings were not evidence to be passed around. And whatever happened between you from this point forward would be decided by the two people actually living it. With that, your soulmate walked out of the room and checked the message sent to you earlier. Still no reply. For the first time that day, their confidence seemed to disappear. Maybe too much time had passed. Maybe you had stopped waiting for explanations. Maybe the truth had arrived too late. Then the screen lit up. Your soulmate froze when they saw your name. A response had finally arrived, but it wasn't the response they had imagined. You had asked one short question, a question that proved you had sensed for a long time that someone else knew things about your connection they were never supposed to know. Your question hit your soulmate harder than any accusation could have. Who else has been reading our messages? They stared at those words because you hadn't asked whether someone interfered. You seemed to already know something had been wrong. Your soulmate began typing, stopped, erased everything, and started again. A rushed explanation would only create more confusion, and for once, they wanted to give you the complete truth. So they answered carefully. They admitted that private conversations had been seen without permission and that pieces of those conversations had traveled through the family. But they also made something unmistakably clear: you had not caused the conflict that followed. Before sending the next message, your soulmate added one sentence they had avoided saying for months: I should have trusted what I knew about you instead of reacting to what everyone else was telling me. Your response didn't arrive immediately, and those quiet minutes forced your soulmate to confront something painful. The family's interference mattered, but it couldn't explain every choice your soulmate had made. There had been moments when they could have asked you directly what was true. Instead, fear and pressure made them withdraw. That realization changed what they wanted to say next. They weren't going to hide behind the family or blame one relative for everything. They told you that someone had read an old private exchange, passed pieces of it along, and allowed a distorted version to spread. Then they admitted that another family member had recently read newer messages about you, but this time, that person confessed and helped uncover what had happened before. The truth was messy, but your soulmate refused to edit it into something more flattering. And then your reply finally appeared: "What did they read about me?" That question made your soulmate's heart race, because answering it meant revealing the very feelings they had been protecting. They could have said, "Nothing important." They could have minimized everything. Instead, they opened the private messages the family member had discovered and read them again through your eyes. There were confessions about missing you. Memories they still carried. Regrets about pulling away. And one message admitting that even when the family encouraged them to move on, they had quietly compared every possible future to the one they had imagined with you. Your soulmate typed a response, but before sending it, another notification appeared from the family member who had confessed earlier. They had found something while reviewing the old screenshots. Something nobody had noticed because everyone had been focused on who leaked the messages. One timestamp proved that a crucial private conversation about you had been accessed before your soulmate had even sent it. And that meant someone may have had access to more than just an unlocked phone. That timestamp forced everyone to reconsider what they thought they knew. Your soulmate checked the old phone, then the screenshot, then the date of the original conversation. Something didn't line up. The family member who first admitted looking at the phone could explain one incident, but not this one. This private exchange had apparently been seen at a time when your soulmate clearly remembered having the phone with them. For a moment, the possibilities felt unsettling. Then a simpler explanation surfaced. Months earlier, your soulmate had left an old device signed into the same messaging account. It had been sitting in the house, almost forgotten, still capable of displaying synchronized conversations. Suddenly, your soulmate remembered seeing that device moved from its usual place. At the time, they assumed someone had been cleaning. Now that tiny memory carried an entirely different meaning. Your soulmate returned to the family and asked who had used the old device. At first, nobody answered. Then one relative quietly admitted borrowing it months ago because their own phone had stopped working. They claimed they never intentionally searched your soulmate's conversations, but notifications had appeared automatically, and your name kept appearing among them. One notification became two. Curiosity became reading. And eventually, they saw the message where your soulmate admitted they were considering a serious future with you. That was the moment everything changed. The relative became worried, spoke to another family member, and the private information began spreading before anyone had ever spoken to you. But then came the detail your soulmate wasn't prepared for. The relative confessed that one message had affected them differently from all the others. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't dramatic. It was something your soulmate had written about why they trusted you. And after reading it, this relative had secretly begun doubting the negative stories being circulated about you. Now your soulmate faced an unexpected truth. The same invasion of privacy that helped create the misunderstanding had also left behind evidence that some relatives knew the story about you didn't make sense. Someone could have spoken up much earlier. Someone could have stopped the assumptions before they grew. Yet fear of admitting how they learned the truth kept everyone silent. Your soulmate immediately returned to your unanswered question: what did they read about me? This time, they stopped hiding behind careful wording. They typed that the family had seen messages revealing how important you were, how much your soulmate regretted the distance, and how seriously they had considered a future with you. Their finger hovered over send. But before they touched the screen, the relative with the old device said there was one message your soulmate needed to see first. It had been written by someone else using that device, and it was addressed directly to the outside person who had helped turn your private connection into a family controversy. The message on that old device was short, but it filled in the missing piece. A relative had contacted the outside person after reading your soulmate's private conversation and asked them to help slow things down before the relationship became more serious. Suddenly, your soulmate understood why the interference had always seemed perfectly timed. Whenever they were preparing to become more open with you, a new concern appeared. Whenever they started questioning the family's warnings, another distorted detail surfaced. The goal had never been to discover the truth about you. It had been to create enough doubt that your soulmate would hesitate. But the old message also revealed something nobody expected. The relative who sent it later tried to undo what they had started. Weeks afterward, they wrote again, admitting they might have judged you unfairly and asking the outside person to stop interfering. That second request had apparently been ignored. Your soulmate looked at the relative differently after reading that. What they had done was still a serious violation of privacy, but the story was no longer as simple as one person deliberately trying to destroy the connection. Fear had started it. Assumptions had strengthened it. Then pride had kept people from admitting they were wrong. The relative finally confessed that after reading more of your soulmate's messages, they had noticed something they couldn't reconcile with the warnings about you. Your soulmate never described you as controlling, demanding, or eager to separate them from their family. Instead, the messages repeatedly showed your soulmate worrying about hurting you through their own indecision. One private line had stayed with the relative for months. Your soulmate had written that you deserved clarity, even if that clarity eventually meant losing you. Hearing that confession made the entire room understand just how differently the private truth looked from the story they had been repeating. Your soulmate finally returned to your message and stopped hesitating. They told you what the family had read. Not every private sentence, because some words still belonged only to the two of you, but enough to answer honestly. They told you their feelings had been discovered, their plans had been discussed without permission, and their silence had never meant you were forgotten. Then they sent it. Seconds became minutes. Nobody in the room spoke. Your soulmate was no longer waiting for the family's approval, they were waiting for your choice. Then your reply appeared. It contained only 2 lines. The first said you appreciated finally hearing the truth. The second made your soulmate sit down. There's something I never told you either. I knew someone had seen our messages months ago. Suddenly, everything shifted again. Because if you had known about the privacy breach before your soulmate discovered it, there was only one question that mattered now. How did you find out, and why had you stayed silent? Your soulmate read your 2 lines again, slower this time. They had spent hours uncovering how private conversations traveled through the family, yet you had apparently noticed the breach long before anyone confessed. Your next message explained why.